The upcoming referendum on a voice to Parliament and constitutional recognition for Indigenous people is not long off now. It's on October the 14th. I've always been in the camp of people who just much prefer to listen to the voices, thoughts and opinions of my Indigenous comrades when it comes to that matter. But that really accounts for why I and a lot of other very usually energetic activists and radical left voices have been somewhat silent. Because a lot of our comrades, a lot of the Indigenous people, thoughtful political Indigenous voices who we've stood alongside the barricades with, aren't very enthused about this and consider it gesture politics. In this house, we firmly believe in Indigenous welfare, sovereignty and liberation. So nobody in this house needs to be convinced of that. And when I say in this house, I mean me and every other radical left, sovereignty-minded activist that I know, Indigenous or otherwise. Yes, we all believe in that. Yes, we all want to vote for anything which will help to see those broader goals get achieved in the long run. But no, it is not going to take tweet-friendly cliches and John Farnham's "You're the Voice" to get people like us over the line. So in the hope that I can reach a position that I believe in, and help advocate one to other activists and people in positions similar to mine, I'm having 3 conversations about the referendum with 3 Indigenous activists and thinkers who have differing positions on that referendum. The first conversation, which you'll be seeing today, is with the legendary Celeste Liddle, who has continued to press a publicly declared undecided position on the referendum. Later on, we'll be speaking to Kieran Stewart-Asherton, who's been declaring a sovereignty-led no position or a progressive no position. Lastly, we'll be speaking to Tarneen Onus-Brown, who's been declaring a yes position. They're all excellent people, they're all experienced activists, and I trust them all. There's no other positions at this long table because I didn't want them. I don't believe in the mainstream no campaign. I don't believe in the cooker or conspiracist no campaign. I like the idea of having a round table that only has thoughtful Indigenous voices at it and no cunts. With that in mind, let's get on to the first chat. You know, I wanted to seek out the perspectives of Indigenous people, Indigenous activists and comrades of mine whose opinions I genuinely respect. And to be honest, there's few opinions that I respect more than Celeste's. She's a veteran Arrernte activist, commentator, columnist and good mate of mine. Celeste, thanks for coming on, mate.
How you going, mate?
Tell me about being publicly undecided as you are on the upcoming referendum and how it's been so far articulating that kind of, not lack of a position, because you don't lack for one, but that lack of a final position on a binary referendum. How has that been putting forward your position so far?
Yeah, you're spot on. Like, I don't lack for a position. In fact, I've got so many positions that that, you know, what I'm kind of left with is a critical eye over every single thing that we're told and said that this referendum will lead to everything else. So it has left me in the undecided space, and you know, I am very much feeling that we're less than a month away from the referendum. I don't quite know what I'm going to walk into the booths and do at this point. I do know that from the yes side of the debate, the yes campaign, that there's a lot of promises that are being made that aren't actually part of the equation. So there's a little bit of misinformation going on. And you know, when you look at the no side, or the dominant no side, the racist or regressive no side, as opposed to, say, sovereignty activists and that, what you're left with is even more misinformation, with a bunch of demonising of Indigenous communities. Both sides are drawing on rank nationalism, which is something that just will not resonate with someone like me. So yeah, this is the space we're in.
Well, do you think that a lot of the campaign, the Yes campaign, is about gesture politics?
I've been critical and I've copped criticism for it, but it's almost about performing anti-racism at times. So a bunch of people are trying to frame the yes vote as the progressive vote. And if you're not progressive, if you're racist, if you're whatever else, you won't be voting. You won't be voting yes. The yes side is being framed as the anti-racist, social development side. What's actually on the table is a very, very simple and limited proposition, which is completely to install a voice in the Constitution. Like, that's it. There will be a voice in the Constitution. And the reason why that's it is because the actual constitutional amendment itself, which will, if the referendum is successful, will go into the Constitution, states plainly that the voice may make representations to the Parliament and the executive government.
Yes.
And that the structure of the voice, the business of the voice, everything else to do with the voice is actually going to be determined by legislation. So a democratic body is not going into the Constitution. A democratic body with power over legislation is not going into the Constitution. We're being told over and over again that there's no power of veto attached to this when it comes to legislation that could be detrimental to our communities. So we might get a voice and we might get listened to, but we don't have to be actually acted upon. But yet this is the progressive side. So it's just kind of, it leaves me with a bit of a taste in my mouth. And also seeing, I don't know, people performing anti-racism via expressing their support for a yes vote is pretty extraordinary.
You yourself said in your most recent Crikey article, you were talking about the press club addresses of Jacinta Price and Marcia Langton, and you pointed out that in Marcia Langton's address that she had said that basically said that another intervention, my apologies, could not occur. If the voice gets up, and that's patently not true because of what you said earlier about the advisory body. And sometimes I feel with this referendum that we're being asked to invest in faith, almost like a prayer. The expectation is if you just believe, then other good things will happen later.
The framing is very much, if we get this over the line, then Australia will prove itself to be a place that is progressing forward, that through the listening to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander voices, that better things are on the horizon. Some of us naysayers, for want of a better term, people who are asking questions at this point in time, are being told that, that if we don't get the voice up, then there's no chance that things like treaties will get up, There's no chance that there will be a truth-telling process in this country. So we're being told that we need the voice to do these things, and it's putting a lot of faith in a body that ultimately has no legislative power. That doesn't have to be listened to. So we are being asked to put our faith into a body that might be completely ineffectual, but we're being told that this is how it could be effectual, And
we're in a country whose governments will gladly defy high court rulings, bend laws, suspend laws in order to wage military interventions on Indigenous communities and to suspend agencies with power like they did with ATSIC. So if they'll do it with them, what's changed about an advisory body is my big worry, you know?
Yeah. And I think one of the biggest things that we're being told to accept on faith at this point in time is the structure of the voice itself. So through the Langton and Calmer report, we're being told that it will be democratically selected by the community, that it will have age and gender representation, remote and regional representation, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander representation. But the fact is, you know, first the referendum has to get over the line, and then the Labor Party has to successfully get their proposed legislation for the structure of the voice through both houses of Parliament. And governments change, you know. Down the track, we could have a coalition government. They could completely scrap the Labor legislation for the voice, so scrap the structure and put in something completely new that's based around their favourite Aboriginal lobbyists, for example.
Despite it, one of the core arguments for the voice, rather than for simply ongoing legislative reform, being that, the Constitution is not subservient to the government of the day, and so therefore, well, if the details of what this advisory body looks like is subservient to the government of the day or legislative reform, then effectively, it can be gutted if a Conservative Party gets in, theoretically, right? Yeah. Defeating the entire purpose of one of the main arguments.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Now, I would ask you for your feelings, which you alluded to before, but I would ask you for your feelings on the mainstream, or as you said, the regressive no campaign. But they're so inclined to operate solely by just sowing doubt, and dare I say it, making shit up, as opposed to actually arguing against the proposal, aren't they? You've written about this, hey?
Yeah. One of the biggest, arguments that I see them parroting all the time is that this will be the biggest change to our Constitution ever made, and is going to divide the nation. They're essentially relying on deep community ignorance with regards to what the Constitution actually is and what it contains. And playing the politics of fear in order to get their stuff over the line, because the Australian Constitution is not something that we should all be, protecting at all costs. There is absolutely no threat that a move like the voice will divide the nation, based on how the Constitution itself came about, because this is a document that was written on the basis or the understanding, the false doctrine of terra nullius, so land belonging to no one, and therefore we can impose this system on top of it. But also, it's that if this tiny little amendment to it is going to divide the nation, then what about all the rest of the racist passages, the racist sections that exist within the Constitution? It was written on the understanding of implementing the White Australia policy, and remnants of that exist to this day. So if we're not already racially divided by the Constitution, I'd like to know how. But if they are really interested in Australia not being racially divided, then why isn't the no side of the debate actually mounting a campaign to remove the racist sections within the Constitution to make it an anti-racist constitution, it's already divisive. Section 25 blatantly states that, a person of a certain race can be, a certain race of people can be banned from voting. Tell me that that's not racially divisive already. And why are we protecting that?
So Celeste, you're undecided, yes? Do you also, in your undecided position, have reservations about, say, voting no because you believe in treaty first? So, what's commonly termed as the progressive no argument or the sovereignty-led no argument. Like, do you also have hesitations about going into that camp? I mean, one hesitation that's currently, that's commonly posited is, essentially it still helps the Conservatives. That's one reservation that seems to be fired off at that camp. Do you have hesitations there?
The debate has been framed as so binary that if we do ask these questions, if we do express these views, if we vote no on the basis of holding out for treaty negotiations, because we believe that those things need to come first, protect the rights before you get written into a colonizer constitution, you immediately get accused of siding with the racists. There's also the whole argument about if we don't get this over the line, then Aboriginal affairs is going to be set back generations, that we'll get no progress. But to me, look, all of this is actually symptomatic of a country that is not across its own history, that's not actually mature enough to be having these conversations. It just shows how far we have to go.
I thought to myself the other day that if a question with binary outcomes forces people who are radically invested in Indigenous sovereignty and liberation and people who are radically not into the same category, then perhaps the problem is with the question.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Do you know? The damage is literally being done already, I mean, do you think the entire process of this referendum is ultimately damaging, like, regardless of its outcome right now? Like, is damage being done as we speak through this whole process?
Yeah. I see... I've had the opportunity to speak to a lot of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people on either side of this debate.
Yeah.
And, they might even be at war with each other in one way, shape or form, engaging in online sort of criticism of the other's view. But the one thing I'll say for every single one of them, regardless of which side they're on, is that everyone's exhausted because we're continuously having these discussions about our rights, no matter which way you frame them or which side you align with. We're having these discussions about our rights, and we're trying to convince people that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander rights, and indeed Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, are actually worthy, but that's a real toxic discussion to be having over and over again, and so people are exhausted.
Why any of these fucking races should be allowed onto the table for this discussion, just because we have so many of them in this country. It's what a fucking shit show, eh?
Yeah, and the other day I even popped off personally myself because Australian racism is so deeply embedded. It's in the very fibre of this country. It's the bedrock of this country. It's what the Constitution was based upon, the erasure of several millennia worth of history in order to impose a different regime on top of a landscape. But having to explain to people that, that whole sentiment around not everyone who votes no will be racist, but all racists will be voting no, when racism is so embedded in this country that we're not actually, we don't avoid the racists by aligning with progressives or being engaged in progressive movements. There's plenty of racism in progressive movements, and I've copped it a lot over the decades that I've been engaged with it. There's some warped view of how people see themselves and how this country works. And that's probably why, if I had my way, we would have reversed the order of the Uluru Statement. It'd be truth-telling, treaty, and then a voice that was based upon treaty negotiations.
Okay, yeah, that's what I was going to ask you, you know. I mean, for as much as it matters at this point, because we don't have that magical ability to travel back through time, we are where we are. If you know, had the capacity to turn back time or to just reinvent this entire question right now for whatever it's worth, that's what you would be doing. Do you see? You've been saying that you believe that the whatever it consists of, that truth telling as a priority should come first, because look at how much fucking truth there's been through this process, right?
Yeah. I strongly feel, based on what I've observed of Australia and Australians living in this country my entire life, that Australia actually needs to re-educate itself. There's a complete lack of understanding of how this country was settled or colonised. You know, there's people still don't know about the frontier wars. They don't understand a lot of the history and how the history informs the present of this country. And so making these sorts of votes without that knowledge just being an accepted part of a national identity, for me, just seems really counterproductive. People are basing their understandings on what a very white Australia policy or great Australian silence understandings of what this country is, which is not truthful. So truth is core. You know, I think too, from truth, a treaty process can be informed because people then have the knowledge in order to engage in those sorts of discussions and the reasons why a treaty process is so important. Lydia Thorpe talks a lot about the ending of the war, frontier wars or intellectual wars or everything else. And the way I see it, to add to that, is the fact that, you know, this country can't actually move forward unless it comes to the table, you know, sits down as equals with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people and starts looking at how we're going to protect the rights of these groups. You know, we've got to actually protect the rights. We've got to have the knowledge, then protect the rights, and then from a robust negotiation process, which a treaty would be, we can then talk about structures of the voice. In my head right now, everything's being done backwards.
I hoped to set out on a process of speaking to, as I said at the start, Indigenous comrades of mine and activists that I respect, whose opinions I think are worth hearing, of different positions, because of, you know, wanting to have a round table that didn't invite racists to it. So I want to ask you, because, you know, I share that position of simply being yet unable to make a decision, you know, with a fair few activist people, a lot of whom are viewers of this channel. And so I guess there's a lot of us who are all in earnest setting out to make a good decision. You have been saying that you think people should merely listen to all the arguments. What I'm asking you is, what's your advice for people? You know, is that about the size of it? Should we just shut up and listen to as many good voices as possible? What do you think? What would you say to people?
From the outset, mate, when we started this conversation, I said that what the public is being fed is a huge amount of misinformation. And so what a lot of people in the public are voting on, or deciding their votes according to right now, are things that simply are not the case. So people do need to actually go back and not only look at the the referendum question itself and the proposed constitutional amendment, but also look at Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander arguments for and against it, and what's actually at stake, here, because there's one thing I can always say about the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander population at large, and it's that we're an incredibly politicised group of people who are across talking about this. We're born into politics. We have these discussions. Our discussions are much more heady and robust within the community than what they are outside of it. So at this point, outside of our community discussions, what I'm seeing is pretty simplistic and at times insulting. But within the communities, teasing out every single part of it, interrogating things like land rights, like treaty, like, the fact that Australian governments have failed Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people generation after generation after generation. Those are the discussions that are happening in the community right now. So unless people have that information, I don't actually believe that they're informed enough on what's at stake here to make a proper decision. And I'm not saying people need to listen to me. They absolutely don't have to listen to me if they don't want to. But they do, if I throw a question up in the air, then there's an opportunity there for people to actually go and see what other people in the community are saying about that particular strain of thought, and to make themselves better informed before they cast a vote. Because it's right now, it just feels that misinformation is winning the day.
Well, we've had a lot of actual information here in this chat, and I would definitely tell people to actually listen to you, or rather to read a lot of, to start by reading. You've also had a lot of speaking appointments and interviews lately as well, so people can Google and seek those out, or follow you via your, I believe you're only updating via your Facebook page at the moment. Would that be about the size of it?
That's right, yep. Yeah.
Okay, so you'll be updating, I suppose, on most of those pieces there, but particularly your written pieces in The Guardian, Crikey, where else? Plenty of places, hey?
Yeah. I'm a freelancer, so I end up in all sorts of spaces. Yeah.
Yeah, I personally recommend that people who are feeling undecided begin, not end, but begin their informational journey rather than their misinformational vibes-based journey through reading what Celeste has to say, because it's been so brilliant and it's really helped my headset heading into these conversations so much. Celeste, thank you so much. Thank you for your time. And thanks for helping me and, everyone watching get our minds right on this debilitating referendum process.
No worries, Tom, anytime.